Immortality, will science find a way? Are you afraid of death? This question, although simple, remains one of the most universal and terrifying that a person can ask themselves. From the moment our consciousness began to understand the concept of transience, an endless struggle with the inevitable began: death. The dream of immortality is not just a whim of civilization, it is deeply rooted in the human psyche. Every culture, every generation, every individual throughout the ages has tried to tame the fear of the end in its own way. For some, it was religion and the promise of life after death. For others, it was an alchemical search for a magic elixir that would stop time. Today, humanity turns its gaze to laboratories, digital models of consciousness, and genetic engineering, new forms of the same eternal struggle against the end of existence. Immortality. Is this not the greatest of all myths? Or maybe not a myth at all, but a goal towards which humanity is inevitably heading. We live longer with each passing year. We have overcome hundreds of diseases. We transplant organs. We design artificial hearts. And scientists can already reverse the aging process in mice. The line between what once seemed impossible and today's reality is increasingly blurring. But before we enter the world of modern science, let's go back thousands of years. Because before man began manipulating DNA, he dreamed of immortality in a completely different way, through gods, magic, and symbols. Understanding how deep this desire goes is the key to answering the question: why are we still unable to accept the end? Is life without death a salvation or a curse? Part 1. Immortality in History and Mythology. Before man learned to look through a microscope, he gazed at the sky, at fire, at water, looking for signs that somewhere out there, beyond the world of mortals, there was something more. Immortality was not so much a dream as a part of culture. Since the dawn of time, it has been present in mythologies, beliefs, and forgotten rituals, as the highest reward or a divine privilege. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest civilizations in the world, one of the first stories about a man who wanted to live forever was born. Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, after the death of his friend, set out on a journey to find the secret of immortality. He found the sage Utnapishtim, who survived the Great Flood and was given eternal life by the gods. However, Gilgamesh was not given this. In China, emperors sought the elixir of life. Alchemists experimented with mercury and herbs, and some, like Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, died by consuming poisonous concoctions, believing they would grant them eternity. The idea of the immortals, 8 sages who conquered death through spiritual purity, Taoist practices, and secret rituals, has survived in Chinese legend to this day. In Greek mythology, immortality was reserved for the gods, but humans were constantly trying to catch up. Heracles, after completing 12 labors, was taken to Olympus as a demigod. Tantalus, who tried to deceive the gods, was sentenced to eternal suffering. In myth, immortality often brought darkness with it. Longevity was something other than a blessing. We cannot forget the European Middle Ages, where the legendary philosopher's stone appears, a substance that was supposed to not only transform metals into gold, but also give eternal life. It was sought by, among others, Nicolas Flamel, a figure surrounded by mystery, about whom myths still circulate today. Among the native peoples of Latin America, there were tales of sources of life, from which a divine being would draw power. The Spanish conquistadors, fascinated by this vision, traveled through the jungles in search of the fountain of youth. Juan Ponce de Leon is said to have believed he would find it on the islands of the Caribbean, but instead of immortality, he found death. Immortality is not just a myth. It is a mirror that reflects our fear, pride, and longing for something we do not understand. Part 2. Aging, the human biological clock. Why do we age at all? This is a question that keeps scientists awake at night, but also anyone who notices the first wrinkles or feels a decline in strength. Although death is sometimes seen as a mystery, aging is a biological process that can be studied, tracked, and maybe even slowed down. Every cell in our body has a certain number of divisions, At the ends of chromosomes are telomeres, like the plastic tips of shoelaces, protecting genetic material from damage. Each time a cell divides, the telomeres shorten. When they become too short, the cell stops dividing and enters a state of senescence, or biological old age. During our lives, we accumulate DNA damage that is not always effectively repaired. In addition, there is oxidative stress, chemical reactions related to oxygen that destroy proteins and lipids in our cells. People talk about rusting from the inside out, although this is an oversimplification, but it is accurate. The process involves so-called free radicals, which act as microscopic saboteurs. Mitochondria also play an important role, intracellular power plants that provide energy. With age, their efficiency decreases, and energy production becomes less effective. The body responds more slowly to stimuli, the immune system weakens, and tissue regeneration takes longer. The brain, our most valuable organ, is also subject to aging processes, which can lead to dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or Parkinson's disease. Some theories suggest that aging is a side effect of evolution. Nature never programmed us to live forever. The survival of the species matters more than the length of an individual's life. So our bodies are optimized for reproduction and maturation, but not necessarily for longevity. Nevertheless, scientists are increasingly understanding these processes. And if something is understood, perhaps it can also be controlled. This is where the fascinating world of modern biotechnology begins, challenging the very foundations of biology. Part 3. Modern Science, Breakthroughs in Research. 100 years ago, death after the age of 60 was something completely natural. Today, the average life expectancy in many countries exceeds 80 years and continues to grow. However, this is not only the result of better hygiene or medicine, it is the result of a conscious, intensive fight against the very nature of biological aging. In laboratories around the world, scientists are conducting research that seemed impossible not long ago. In Japan, Shinya Yamanaka's lab won a Nobel Prize for discovering induced pluripotent cells, adult cells that can be reverted to a youthful state and reprogrammed. In practice, this means creating tissues and even organs that bear no signs of aging. In the United States, Altos Labs, backed by billionaires like Jeff Bezos, is investing billions of dollars in research on cell reprogramming to reverse aging processes at the molecular level. The idea is to turn back the biological clock without losing the cell's identity. Experiments on mice have already brought the first successes: organ regeneration, improved cognitive functions, and life extension by several dozen %. In turn, Israeli researchers have proven that oxygen therapy in hyperbaric chambers can lengthen telomeres, something that was considered impossible for decades. Their results indicate that regular oxygen therapy can rejuvenate immune system cells. CRISPR, a breakthrough gene editing technology, is also entering the game. Although originally used to treat genetic diseases, it is now being tested for its effect on genes related to aging. In theory, it could turn off genes responsible for tissue aging, although these are still very early experiments. One cannot ignore the research on senolytes, chemical compounds that eliminate old, damaged cells. It is believed that they are one of the reasons why the body loses its ability to regenerate. Removing them can not only slow down aging, but even partially reverse it. It all sounds like magic, but it is science. More and more precise, more and more bold, more and more determined to change the course of human life once and for all. Part 4. Transhumanism and Digital Immortality. What if we don't have to stop the body from aging because the body will no longer be needed? Transhumanism is an intellectual and technological movement that assumes that humans can, and should, transcend biological limitations. It's not just about extending life, but about evolving into something more, into a being that, thanks to technology, will be able to function outside the body, and even outside time. One of the most controversial ideas of transhumanism is mind uploading, the transfer of human consciousness to a digital environment. This is not a copy of brain data, but the transfer of identity, memories, emotions, and self to an artificially created system that could exist independently of biology, theoretically, forever. From a scientific perspective, This is still a futuristic vision, but there are already companies and institutes working on mapping the human brain with unprecedented precision. The Blue Brain Project in Switzerland, the Brain Initiative in the United States, and Elon Musk's Neuralink are all trying to understand how to simulate the human mind in a computer. Another interesting concept is the creation of a hybrid of humans and artificial intelligence. If our brains are able to connect directly to machines, and the first implants of this type already exist, then perhaps part of our consciousness will be transferred to the network. Immortality not as an endless heartbeat, but as an endless stream of data, thoughts, and memories. However, the question arises, would such a digital version of ourselves really be us? By copying the mind, are we also copying the soul? Where does the human end and the machine begin? It is not just technology. It is a philosophy that forces us to ask questions to which we may never obtain clear answers. It is becoming increasingly difficult to reject the idea that the mind could exist independently of the body, because what, until recently seemed like fiction, is now becoming a real direction of research. Part 5. The Shadow of Eternity, Threats and Ethics. Immortality sounds like a dream come true. But have we ever considered what it would really mean to live forever? Before we get carried away by the idea of eternal existence, it's worth taking a look at the other side of the coin, the dark side of immortality. The first and most obvious problem is overpopulation. The world is already struggling with a resource crisis, lack of water, environmental degradation, growing demand for food. If people stopped dying and continued to be born, the ecological balance would collapse very quickly. Would immortality be available only to the chosen ones, to the rich, the privileged? The vision of a world in which the elite live forever and the rest die as before is reminiscent of a dystopia straight from a dystopian novel. Another issue is cultural stagnation. If society consisted mainly of the same long-lived individuals, wouldn't there be no room for fresh ideas, rebellion, youthful enthusiasm? Human history is a continuous cycle of generations. Each one brings something new. Stopping this cycle could lead to stagnation, even regression. It is also impossible to ignore psychological issues. Can the human mind, created to survive for several decades, bear the awareness of existence for eternity? Memory, trauma, loss, can they accumulate to the point where life itself becomes a burden? Can a person be happy if they do not know the end? From an ethical perspective, immortality presents us with a whole new dimension of responsibility. If there is a possibility of extending life, does everyone have the right to it? Can states deny access to therapies that prolong existence? Do the children of unborn generations have the right to a planet where the elders will never leave? Finally, the question of meaning. What gives value to moments is their transience. Do love, friendship, art, or sacrifice have the same power if they are not threatened by transience? Doesn't life without end lose precisely that which makes it valuable? Part 6. People who try immortality today. Immortality is no longer just a fantasy of philosophers and poets. Today, it is a real goal, at least for those with enough money, courage, and faith in the future. Right now, right before our eyes, a global movement of people who have decided to challenge death is emerging, not as a metaphor, but as a literal project. One of the most high-profile examples is Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal and an investor known for his controversial views. Thiel has been funding startups focused on anti-aging therapies and research into extending cell lifespans for years. His motivation? His open belief that death is a technical problem that needs to be solved. Equally ambitious is Dmitry Itskov, a Russian billionaire who in 2011 initiated the Avatar 2045 project. His plan is to transfer human consciousness to a synthetic body by the mid-21st century. The project combines neurobiological engineering, artificial intelligence, and philosophy into a single, bold vision of a human being without biological limitations. Another figure is Ray Kurzweil, director of engineering at Google, futurologist and author of many books. Kurzweil predicts a singularity, a moment when artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence, and we will merge with it, becoming digital biological hybrids. He argues that if we survive to the 2040s, everything could change. Technology will give us access to functional immortality, That is, life without end, without disease, with the possibility of updating the body and mind. At the other end of the spectrum are companies involved in cryonics, freezing bodies or brains immediately after death, with the hope that future generations will find a way to resurrect them. The most famous is the Alcor Life Extension Foundation in Arizona, which preserves more than 200 people, including famous scientists and millionaires, in liquid nitrogen. For them, death is just a temporary inconvenience. There are also those who take more down-to-earth steps. They use diets based on calorie restriction, monitor every parameter of their body, use supplements that are supposed to slow down degenerative processes. Many of them simply live consciously. They choose healthier habits and take care of their bodies every day. What do they all have in common? The belief that death is not fate, it is a challenge, and humanity is just beginning this duel. Will man truly become immortal? Is this the beginning of a new era, or just another illusion, like many in human history? Perhaps the future holds an answer that we are not yet ready for. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you want, and see you in the next episode.